All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tim Haab. I'm the director of the School of Environment and Natural Resources. On behalf of the Environmental Professionals Network, I want to thank everybody for coming today. This is one of our first events we've held here in Ohio Union. Don't worry about it. If you're used to going over to the friendly confines of the 4-H Center, we'll be back there for our next presentation and for most of the presentations this year. So thanks for making your way over here today. I also want to thank everybody that's joining us by live stream. So we are live streaming all of our events again this year. We're excited about that. This event is the first EPN breakfast for our 2025 series. And we're excited to say that today marks the first event of our 13th year. So we've been able to build a... The other thing that we're really excited about is that it's really great to be able to get together face-to-face and have conversations that are difficult to have. I think we all know that over the past couple of decades, trust in science has really been eroded. And these kinds of conversations are critical to building that trust back. So the ability to get together our researchers with our policymakers and others is just absolutely critical to the future of science, to the future of the environment. And I'm glad everybody's out here today to join in these conversations. For our in-person guests, on your table, there's a QR code. If you want to scan that QR code, it'll give you bios of all of our speakers in today's program. For live streamers, you can click on the link that Molly Beans posted in the chat. These events wouldn't be possible without all of our long-term sponsors. We have a number of annual sponsors that have been willing to contribute to allow us to have these events and to allow students to attend the events. We want to thank the Sustainability Institute at Ohio State, NG North America and the Ohio State Energy Partners, the OSU Facilities Operations and Development, the Ohio Division of Wildlife, the Ohio EPA, and we're thrilled to announce a new annual sponsor this year for EPN, Delco Water Company. We have Jeff Kaufman from Delco here today. Thanks, Jeff. And also, today's event wouldn't be possible without the Taft Law Firm playing a big role. They were the driving force behind bringing tonight's evening film screening to Columbus, and we're grateful for their sponsorship. Sorry, my pages are stuck together. All right, so I'm going to keep my comments short today because we have a number of speakers, and I'm going to give them enough time to say what they need to say. So today you're going to be hearing from experts and practitioners from a wide range of entities, including the Nature Conservancy, the Ohio Environmental Council, and the Midwest Biodiversity Institute. Again, if you want the bios for each of them, you can scan the QR code on your table. I'm also happy to let you know that today, Ohio State's School of Environment and Natural Resources, we have over 600 students, undergraduate students, and over 100 graduate students. And we've had an exciting event here in our school this year. For those of you who are familiar with it, we have an island campus on Lake Erie. We refer to it as Stone Lab. And this year was the 100th anniversary of Stone Lab and the research that we do there. So we're excited about that. So I'm going to be quiet now, and I'm going to bring up the more important people. The most important person in the room is our undergraduate student, Bella Shorr. Bella is an SENR undergraduate student studying environmental policy and decision making. She's here to represent the student voice today. So please join me in welcoming Bella up to the stage.
Okay, I think that's a little better. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today for the first EPN breakfast event of the semester. My name is Bella Shorr, and I'm a second year at The Ohio State University, studying both environmental policy and philosophy, politics, economics. I'm excited about today's program on environmental law and policy because there have been major changes in environmental policy at the federal and state level these past few years. In this way, I'm eager to hear environmental professionals translate these complex political developments into feasible and actionable takeaways. I have always been passionate about protecting the environment. but only recently have I looked to protect the environment through law and policy. I spent the past summer at Ohio Sea Grant's Stone Laboratories, where I had the chance to fully dive into the relationship of nature, wildlife, policy, research, law, and humanity. I also came to fully understand that comprehensive management of Lake Erie requires not just a sound understanding of the environment, like fish community dynamics, but also a sound understanding of policy and law, essentially human community dynamics. At Stone Lab, I took an environmental policy course. So while most students were fishing and collecting bugs for their classes, I was stuck inside studying the history of the Clean Water Act. In this class, we learned about the evolution of environmental policy, all the way from the start of U.S. conservation in the 1800s, to the Cuyahoga River Fire, to the establishment of the Clean Water Act and NEPA, and to the creation of international environmental treaties like the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreements. We also went on many field trips, where we interacted with the Toledo city government and nonprofits, participated in an environmental professionals council conference in Columbus, and even visited a restored H2O Ohio wetland. One quote that really stood out to me from the Toledo field trip was, "Nothing to us without us." This short but powerful quote changed my outlook on human community governance and inspired me to advocate for incorporating the community on policy decisions about the community. During this course, it became increasingly clear to me that lawyers and policymakers play a very important role in natural resource management, which has emboldened me to pursue a career in environmental law, and one of the many reasons I'm looking forward to meeting many environmental attorneys throughout today's event. As I share my experiences, I want to emphasize that environmental policy and law are both very important tools that we can use to protect the world we all care about. I want to give my deepest appreciation for everyone who has worked in or has interest in the environmental law and policy field. As we learned from our speakers today, U.S. environmental policy is changing in many ways we have never seen before. From my perspective as a student, these changes can be perplexing, to put it lightly. Throughout the day, I encourage each of you to go out of your way and connect with students and professionals. There are many things you can ask each other, like, what inspired you to pursue environmental law? If you could, would you be a judge on the Supreme Court? Or, who do you think would win in a fight, the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot? I know many students like myself are interested in the field, and equally many of us are uncertain about the future of environmental policy and law in the U.S. Through these unprecedented times, however, it is more important than ever to support each other and to encourage our peers who are interested in the field. I now have the honor of welcoming Chris Yoder. Chris is an OSU alumni and is the research director at the Midwest Biodiversity Institute. Chris has managed projects relating to water quality and biological assessment for state, federal, and non-governmental organizations. He has also done research in the Clean Water Act policies and will discuss a retrospective on the Clean Water Act this morning. I'm very excited to learn today, and I hope you all are too. Thank you all for your time, and please join me in welcoming Chris Yoder.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. So I was asked to give a historical perspective on the Clean Water Act, and in particular documenting its successes and preserving institutional knowledge. So this is the 1972 amendments. There were, I think, 3 previous clean water, or it was actually called the Federal Water Pollution Control Act. There were actually 3 of these that predated 1972 that go back to 1948. But this is the first one that actually had what we call teeth, that actually mandated action to reduce pollution. So it was called Public Law 1992-500. Contrary to popular belief, President Nixon vetoed the Clean Water Act, and that veto was quickly overridden within hours. So, and the reasons for vetoing that President Nixon cited are familiar even today. So the override was the result of strong public and political support for taking decisive actions to finally reduce or eliminate gross water pollution. We've known about, at that time, we had known about water pollution for 130 years. So it was finally time to take action. Also, it was evidence that adherents of no government interference with business and commerce were a powerful minority that has morphed into today's much stronger advocacy for deregulation. There was also something written at that time called the Powell Memo, which really became the framework for Project 2025. So that's been with us all along. So how did we get to where we are today? It's a winding 50-plus year journey consisting of both pre and post Clean Water Act water quality programs at Ohio EPA, US EPA oversight, and some interesting forks in the road on that journey. And that's part of the institutional knowledge we're really lacking today, is that knowledge. I apologize for the poor quality of this, but that's the only thing you can find online. It goes back to something called the National Municipal Policy and Strategy. This really was the framework for the reduction of gross pollution from municipal sewage plants. And it resulted in wastewater treatment plants attaining water quality-based levels of treatment, or what we called advanced treatment, or AWT. It was seen by many as an overly ambitious goal beyond secondary treatment, which is really a technology-type-based limit. And one thing, while advanced treatment is the treatment du jour, nobody questions it, could this push to deregulate push us back to secondary treatment? And what would that do to the water quality of our streams and rivers and lakes? That, to me, is the red line that would be crossed if that happened. So, despite these doubts, of which there were many back then, the National Municipal Policy spurred water quality-based permitting in the 1980s. It established a compliance deadline of July 1, 1988. So, the City of Columbus is a really good example of this and this history. And they have a web page that details the entire history of Columbus's sewerage system. So we go all the way back to 1904 for the first sewage treatment plant. That's at the site of the Jackson Pike plant, by the way, now. And notice how they spell filtration. They call it filtration. That was replaced by secondary treatment in 1968 at the Southerly plant, and now today's advanced treatment. So the history of dealing with sewage in a rapidly growing population illustrates how difficult it was and still is for the engineering practice of the day to catch up. The incentive to catch up, however, would not have happened without Clean Water Act mandated, that dirty word, mandate, wastewater treatment technology and revised water quality standards in 1978. So Columbus has been good to keep this ball rolling by funding a monitoring program of their own, which we conduct. And this is, if you want to see a good retrospective analysis all the way back to the 60s up through 2020 and even 2022, you can go on our website and find these reports. So one of the best documented Clean Water Act success stories almost did not happen. In 1970, serious doubts existed about achieving treatment beyond secondary and attainment of Clean Water Act biological integrity goals in what we call an effluent-dominated river. What that means is effluent dominates the flow of the river, especially during the summer, fall, drier weather periods. And that happens in the Scioto River downstream of Columbus. In 1977, the Scioto River below Columbus was originally designated as a limited warm water habitat and with criteria that accommodated the current loadings which were polluting the river. US EPA disapproved this in 1978, and one comment here, we had a much different US EPA back then than we do today, needless to say. And they insisted on the equivalent of today's warm water habitat designation, which in their view, is consistent with Section 101A2 of the Clean Water Act to restore and maintain fish, shellfish, and wildlife in and on the, and recreation in and on the waters. Had limited warm water habitat been left intact, we would not have achieved the degree of improvement witnessed post-1988 through 2022. So to highlight the Scioto River, it's now in full attainment downstream of Greenlawn Avenue. The green, full attainment of warm water, the blue, full attainment of exceptional warm water, and that redesignation took place in the late 20-teens based on the fact that it can now achieve that higher level of biological quality. And that's quite an achievement. The improvement across Ohio in the major rivers has been evident since 1980, when just barely 20% of the river miles attained, all the way up through 2010, when almost 95% of the rivers attained their standard. And these are the biological standards, by the way, not the easier to meet chemical standards. An estimated $60 billion spent in the 7 major metropolitan areas of Ohio, and a lot more since then, because it takes money to maintain these systems. The question is, can it be sustained in today's deregulatory climate? We urgently need to counter the rapid loss of institutional knowledge and experience by better educating new managers and staff about the history of water pollution control successes and shortcomings. And that awareness is fading as people retire and move away from that area of employment. And finally, this is a paper I wrote for the Maine Policy Journal about the Clean Water Act and can we sustain its success, and where we discuss some of the early assaults on the Clean Water Act that really happened at the state level, beginning as far back as 2010. And it's all part of a national playbook. So sustaining this level of success presumes that we can maintain the Clean Water Act. So those are my remarks, and thank you for having me.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Trent Dougherty. I have the privilege of working with Chris Yoder as Executive Director of MBI, as well as another hat of being an environmental lawyer for the past, 20 years or so. And if anybody knows Chris or has worked with Chris like me, you know that really hurt him to be as positive as that. I will do my best to bring things down a little bit and answer that question of, will we be able to survive deregulation? I'll let you know my answer is no. But let me talk about what I think is maybe not as exciting as Deep History of the Clean Water Act, but I think is more pivotal, and that's process. That's legal process. Ever since there's been regulations, whether it's on environmental protection or anything, those who have been regulated have done everything possible to make sure that those regulations don't impact them very hard. And it's based on 3 tenets: smaller government, more efficiency, and let's spend less money. Now, to be honest, those are common sense. Those are things we can all agree to. And because of that, we've seen in Ohio a bipartisan view on regulatory reform. These 3, through my 20 years as an environmental professional, these are ones that I've been somewhat involved in. So Governor Strickland had a regulatory task force for reform that it moved on in Governor Kasich with a common sense initiative to focus on what is impacting business. I was probably the only person who testified against the bill that implemented that, because, well, I saw that it didn't do anything to point out the benefits of these regulations. But I want to spend a little bit more time on Senate Bill 9. And that is one that's most recent, is really a good case study in terms of how regulatory reform has got to where it is in Ohio and where I fear it will be as we move forward based on what's happening at the federal level. Senate Bill 9 was focused on streamlining Ohio's regulations. So essentially, they wanted to take that big administrative code, take out the regulatory restricted language. So those are your shalls, your shall nots, your wills, your will nots. Reduce those by 30%. And the thought was that's going to be very helpful for everybody. We'll have that fewer regulations. And if you didn't make that mark in those 3 years of reducing 30%, then you had this 2-for-1. So if you wanted to put in, if you were a state agency, wanted to put in a regulatory restriction, you had to pull 2 out. To me, that sounded like a gimmick, and I still think that's a gimmick to today. In fact, these are what one person said, me in my testimony, that these 30% reductions in words, if done inappropriately, would result in it's actually a lot more than 30% reduction in environmental and human health protections. Yes, was I being a little bit provocative? Yes. Did I say these words constantly in comments for 3 years? Yes. And hopefully what that did is that turned out, and my friends out here that are with the agencies did a great job in taking those shalls and shall nots and removing them without impacting the rules, the substantive rules. So we got to June 30, 2025. Many of the agencies had 30% reductions. Did we see substantive regulatory restrictions? No, didn't see no material changes. Did we see loss in regulatory lag? No, I still hear regulated communities saying things take too long. Was it political performance? I think so. But we've seen the General Assembly in this budget bill that was just passed say, hey, you were supposed to remove regulations, not just remove words. So they came back in the budget bill, pushed for more and tighter restrictions. Thankfully, those were vetoed out by Governor DeWine. I thank him on that. But the threats are going to continue to return. General Assembly has already said they're going to go back to regulatory restrictive language cuts. And I don't think it's going to be a reduction in words. It's going to be a reduction in actual regulation because they have the playbook, and that's the playbook being done by the federal government right now. Deregulation at the federal level, similar to what the ideology was with the re-reg that I talked about for the past 20 years, but it's not the same. It achieves efficiency through actually choosing not to regulate, not to enforce, to push out the expertise. Not, as Chris said, the way it's looking now is that we've lost some historical knowledge really based on attrition in Ohio. In this situation, it is not a consequence, but an actual goal. And we've seen this. We've seen it in action. Doge and defund. I don't need to talk about all this. We've experienced this for the past 9 months. Freezing billions of dollars that should be going to communities that have been overlooked for that 50 plus years when it comes to environmental protection. Those are gone. But I think the biggest is the EPA administrator. And Chris said this is a different EPA than there was in the 70s and the 80s. That is absolutely for sure. We are looking at potentially, at the first round, 31 reductions in rules. So taking rules for greenhouse gas reductions, getting those off the books, mercury and air toxic regulations, pulling those off the books, wastewater regulations for oil and gas, pulling those off the books. Again, like I said, ending environmental justice protections, and a proposed reduction in the budget bill of 54% of the budget for the US EPA. Unprecedented even in those days in the 80s when I was a kid and we had the Ronald Reagan administration, which I thought was anti-environment. This is even worse. And I'm sure many of you are asking, is this legal? No, I don't believe so. You need to go the same process of science, data, public participation to get those regulations in place, those 31 regulations. The same process is needed, data, science, public participation to pull those, but they're not doing that. Congress and the courts have a responsibility in here. However, will it matter? If any of you were at OEC's law conference last year, you know that I'm not a glass half full guy. I'm not a glass half empty guy. I am a glass bone dry kind of guy. So I'm absolutely pessimistic here. Do I believe that the states, including Ohio, are going to follow this lead? I fear it. So what I say is the lawyers in this group, please take on those cases to stop the reductions. The scientists and advocates in this room, take your science, advocate state level, federal level, local level. Make sure that folks know why we have these regulations. And my friends at the agencies, especially those that I've worked with for the past 20 years, keep doing what you're doing because you're doing a great job despite this. And I will move it on to a happier guy, Nathan Johnson.
Hi, everybody. I think Trent may have been joking when he said he was going to pass it on to a happier guy, but we'll see. Sure, I got the clicker here going. Okay, great. So really fascinating things happening across the board. Trent obviously kind of unrolled or shared a big picture of a lot of what's happening. In the NEPA context, it's absolutely the case as well. And we'll cover some of that today at a really high level. There's a lot of really fascinating details here, as there typically is with legal matters, but even at the high level, it's really just fascinating. By the way, I'm Nathan Johnson. I'm an attorney with the Ohio Environmental Council. I tend to focus on public lands issues, and I think that's where we'll start off. A lot to talk about with NEPA, but I want to front load it with a little bit about, well, why does NEPA even matter? And part of it, and it matters for all manner of environmental issues, especially when federal agencies are involved. But in the realm of public lands, federal public lands, it's really central. And why do public lands matter for us? Well, I think we all know on some level, but for some context in Ohio, we're only about 44th out of all 50 states in terms of public land acres per capita. So that relative lack of access and outdoor space that's open to the public means that what we have is even more important, more valuable, more vital than it might otherwise be, something to keep in mind. Only about 4.5% of Ohio is publicly owned, for some context. And there's some maps up here. You can see and I list the Wayne National Forest. It's that little the little picture there on the state of Ohio. You might say, well, that looks like a lot more than 4.5% of the state, and indeed it is. It's a little misleading. That's actually the congressional boundaries in which the feds can purchase land, but the actual forest itself is much smaller. That said, it's by far the largest public land we have in Ohio. It's about 250,000 acres. And I think that the next largest single public land might be like 60,000 acre Shawnee State Forest. So partly why that matters is, as by far the largest public land in Ohio, it's the single largest carbon sequestration sponge, at least terrestrial, in Ohio. So just in terms of framing how we're thinking about these issues, that's just one layer, but I think it's worth mentioning. And this picture here on the right, this is in the Marietta unit of the Wayne National Forest. It's a little hard to tell, but long story short, what that map is displaying is about 40,000 acres of the forest that the federal agencies, Bureau of Land Management in particular, in April signed off on authorizing oil and gas leasing, fracking, unconventional shale development on about 40,000 acres there. Again, that's a huge area of land for Ohio. That's larger than Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And again, thinking of the Wayne as the largest carbon sucking sponge in Ohio, the data, if you look in the agency's NEPA documentation, the data shows that this would actually eat up at least 30 years of the entire Wayne National Forest carbon sequestration services for 30 years. So that's a big deal. Again, one of the reasons, and honestly, I think one of the great benefits, I might go over 8 minutes. Someone's going to have to yank me, I think. But one of the great benefits of NEPA is that, you know, the public probably wouldn't really even have access to any of these facts or many of them, but for the fact that we have this great statute that forces public information, public notice, public involvement. A lot going on with NEPA these days, as with everything. So there have been a number of executive orders, as we all know, certainly a few involving public lands in NEPA. One of them that I know a lot of public lands litigators and practitioners are paying close attention to is an executive order, came out in March. It's an emergency order in that, and this is a theme obviously we're seeing, but everything's an emergency. There's now a state of emergency declared in 60% of the nation's national forest system. Everything's burning, everything's being destroyed by disease and bugs. So we've got an emergency, and therefore let's issue a secretarial order. Let's see, yes, immediate expansion of American timber production. So basically, long story short, and this of course is my take on it, but I would say it's very accurate, the solution to this emergency situation, which the vast majority of the Wayne, the emergency, I'm not sure what it is, apparently it's an emergency, but the solution typically is going to be really heavy volume industrial extraction of timber from our federal national forests. That's typically the solution that's offered. So we're expecting a lot of that, certainly nationwide, keeping our eye out to, certainly with the Wayne, wouldn't be surprised if we saw some really large volume-focused timber proposals coming out in the relatively near future. And I've got this fun little play on words here, partly because, and again, this is by virtue of the fact that we've got this great statute, NEPA, that we know that at least in the Ironton unit of the Wayne, which is probably where a lot of logging would occur, and I suspect in the other units too, but definitely in the Ironton unit, the vast majority of the soils there are rated as very severe to severe soil erosion hazard ratings. So long story short, that means if you go in and you do a bunch of industrial volume removal, you're probably going to have a lot of mudslides, flooding. There already is flooding irrespective of what's happening down there. So ironically, some of the quote-unquote emergency-focused executive orders and following secretarial orders are, at least in this case, going to potentially cause actual emergency situation. So just a little irony there. So to jump into NEPA, it's often called the Magna Carta of U.S. environmental law, even environmental law. Globally, it was the first major U.S. environmental statute. Long story short, it's basically a look before you leap statute. Federal agencies, if they're going to undertake major actions, they've got to take a pause and look at the science, look at the repercussions of what may result from those actions before they make a final decision. I think we can appreciate why that would be important. One of the great things about it, and I've been hitting on this, it's not just geared towards making sure agencies are taking actions that are well informed, but it's also, and I think this is especially important nowadays, it's also really geared towards involving the public in government decision making. And it's really fascinating to hear a lot of the rhetoric about, bureaucracy and how it's undemocratic. But in fact, our agency officials who have deep expertise through NEPA are often working with the public because the public has a say, at least in what information is before the agency, what the agencies are thinking about. It's giving the public a forum to comment on the agency's decision-making process. And that's something we don't have the opportunity, really, to inject ourselves in congressional decision making or executive level decision making outside of these sort of public notice and comment periods. So again, one of the really great benefits of NEPA. And I don't have time for all of this, but to kind of dial it in a little bit, well, what practically speaking, if you're working on a NEPA case, at least as a public interest litigator or attorney, what are you looking for on a project? Generally speaking, and in other professions too. So you've got a major action. The question usually in practice is there a significant impact, or is this project devoid of significant impacts? That's the threshold that determines whether the federal agency has to prepare an environmental assessment, which is sort of a short form, much less intensive look at the potential environmental effects. However, if the agency, and it's usually put together to determine whether or not impacts of the action will be significant, and if they are determined to be significant, the agency then has to go and prepare an environmental impact statement, which is actually, that is the environmental review that's contemplated and mandated by NEPA. That actually is what NEPA is calling for, a quote-unquote detailed statement on these major federal actions. But in practice, a lot of these projects, most of them, if they're not being totally, I shouldn't say totally, but categorically excluded from even environmental assessment review, which is happening more and more, a lot of it is coming down to, is this project going to have a significant effect? I will kind of tie in, NEPA, I think it's really important to mention the Administrative Procedure Act whenever we're talking about NEPA. They go together very well. So first, if you're going to litigate a NEPA case, the cause of action is actually brought under the APA. And this is where I would say, so NEPA really is focused on disclosure, on information, on informed agency decision-making and public involvement. The APA comes in, and this is really great because it's really focused on rationality. At least in principle and theory, it's focused on forcing rationality on federal agency, executive agency action. And usually the key judicial review standard is going to be the arbitrary and capricious standard of review. I'm sure many or most folks have heard of that and are familiar with it. But yeah, it's really, as a practitioner, I think it can be really interesting because it gives one a platform to really scrutinize, hey, is the agency just making things up here? Is the administration just totally contradicting itself? Is it actually explaining what it's doing? Does this make sense, or are we just, are they just trying to blind us with a bunch of garbage or whatever they're flooding the zone with? So I think having that legal hook that allows for the public to scrutinize rationality in executive agency decision making is a really beautiful thing, and that is why I am happy, because we have statutes. We may not have all the regulations. I didn't even get to that yet. Here we are. Another executive order. So NEPA has had a set of implementing regulations since 1978 through the CEQ. Up until 2020, they were essentially the same. The Trump administration changed them a fair amount. Biden administration came in and changed them back again quite a bit. And then actually very early this year, the Trump administration issued a new regulation completely dissolving, rescinding all of the NEPA regulations, the CEQ regulations. So it's a very interesting time. I should say that many of the individual agencies also have their own implementing regulations. But that said, those CEQ regulations had been in place and really guided a lot of the process for so many years. So it's a very interesting time. Part of the executive order and subsequent secretarial orders, I guess you could say, also directing every individual agency to basically reconsider their individual NEPA implementing procedures, whether regulation or guidance, within 12 months. So all of those individual sets of regs and guidance may look quite a bit different in the fairly near future too. And I think I might stop there. We can always get into more on the Q&A. But thank you.
everybody. My name is Mary Turocy. I'm the Director of Policy and Government Relations for the Nature Conservancy in Ohio. For those who aren't familiar, the Nature Conservancy, or TNC, is a global nonprofit, and our mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. So as you can imagine, a very narrow mission. But I want to talk to you a little bit today about kind of what the policy landscape looks like for folks like me who are working in the policy sphere. I know some of you are attorneys and looking for CLEs. You're not going to get them from me. I like to say I'm like a lawyer light. I never got a degree, but I work a lot with laws. Lawyer zero, if you want to use a soda analogy. I just kind of want to explore what's going on and perhaps give folks an idea of some avenues that aren't necessarily closed yet to policy advocacy. Before I go any further, I know we've been talking a lot about policy, but I want to make sure that, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as what policy is. I think many folks think of policy kind of in the frame of legislation and maybe ballot initiatives. But as you've heard today, it really does include a huge spectrum from administrative rules, from mechanisms like taxing and regulations. So it's important to kind of have if you're trying to look at the landscape, it's important to keep that in mind. So what is the moment that we are in right now, and why is it important? I think I'm probably not alone in that I feel like I hear the words, these are unprecedented times on a daily basis, which is wild. We just keep going more and more unprecedented. But the way that is kind of showing itself as far as policy is concerned is the function of government, the way it works, and the impact that it has on individuals is changing. The landscape is changing, and it's happening right underneath our feet. We're moving with it. But I think a North Star for those of us who work in the environmental field is that nature tends to be an issue that can unite people, even in divisive political climates. This moment is different in that truly the kind of collaboration and compromise that used to happen, sometimes it would happen behind closed doors, and in public it would be very, very partisan. But those partisan actors that used to find compromise behind closed doors are finding it less and less often. But I still like to think, and the Nature Conservancy still likes to think, that most people and that have that connection to nature and can find common ground there. So at the Nature Conservancy, we have a saying that policy makes conservation possible. And we do believe that it is the greatest lever to the kind of transformational reform that we need at this pivotal moment. It can be nonpartisan, it can be practical, and it can be grounded in science, despite what you might hear these days. And environmental professionals can motivate government action because of this shared connection we have to the earth and to nature. So now to the meat and potatoes. What does the moment look like? At the federal level, as you've heard, the landscape is becoming more challenging. There are fewer opportunities and increased competition for funding. There are increased challenges. We all know that it's a very hyper-partisan environment right now in Congress and with the president. There are also decreasing opportunities. It's really a perfect storm. There are decreasing opportunities in the form of rolling back funding, especially very recently, the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act have been kind of whittled away by executive orders and the recent One Big Beautiful Reconciliation Package that really took away some of those funding streams and tax breaks for programs that were created to advance some environmental goals. And what that means is that some projects that we're kind of penciling out for businesses are not going to pencil out anymore, and they're having to be scuttled. For example, in Ohio, we were going to be a part of the Appalachian Hydrogen Hub, And because some of those grants were essentially pulled back, it's looking like most of that work that was going to happen in Ohio that was going to really create technological advancement, create jobs, and spur the decarbonization of some industries is not moving forward, at least right now. Federal executive agencies, as you've heard, are also making it harder to do the environmental work that we've been doing. It's also harder to access funds, even in projects that have already been approved. Just earlier this month, the Department of Interior released a secretarial order saying that the Land and Water Conservation Fund grants will have to go through state and local approval, and that could potentially slow projects down or even stop projects if there isn't that local approval. So this context all just underscores the need for strategic advocacy to navigate these complexities and find opportunities to secure resources for conservation and environmental issues. Because of these hurdles at the federal level, many, including us, are looking also to the opportunities at the state level. In some ways, Ohio's policy environment is, we'll say, sufficiently removed from the direct influence of congressional and presidential politics to allow for more flexibility, because policymakers aren't quite as mired in that hyper-partisan rhetoric. Certainly, Ohio has its own partisan rancor, and as Trent talked about, Ohio has its own partisan rancor, and we're about to enter into a redistricting cycle, our second in the decade, and you will, I'm sure, see it on the news. But there are opportunities for compromise, and there are opportunities for advocates to make a difference. And the reference to Trent's speech that I meant to refer to was we had a Republican governor who vetoed Republican General Assembly attempts to roll back regulations. So it is possible, and in Ohio, we have a little bit more flexibility. As those in the room are probably very familiar, the H2O Ohio program has been kind of a model for states in their water quality programs. And I can tell you, my colleagues in other states are very envious of the hundreds of millions of dollars that we've put into water quality in Ohio through that program. But in the most recent budget process, the program saw huge reductions. ODNR's programs saw reductions over 50% in their budget, and the Ohio EPA's H2O Ohio budget was reduced by, I think, around 75%. So what are we doing about this? I think for many of us, including policymakers, it was kind of a wake-up call that when you have big, important programs like this, there's no guarantee that they're going to continue or that they're going to continue in the robust way that they have. So we are looking to other options. How can we make sure that there's sustained and continuous long-term funding for H2O Ohio and water quality programs? So we're looking at things such as potentially taking it from the GRF, the General Revenue Fund, which ebbs and flows with tax revenues, and looking for something like potentially a constitutional bond amendment that would secure that for a longer term. And for the record, it's very popular. Voters do like it. So when you have a flexibility like we have in Ohio with our ballot process, it's a way to kind of get through that political mire to get to the people and hear from them what they want. All right. At the local level, big, important, and impactful things are also happening. I think most people, when they think about politics and when they think about policy, they think about Congress, maybe they think about the State House, but the local level is extremely important. And crucially, the organizations and individuals that are engaged in their communities have a much higher impact on their local politics. So it's important to keep a finger on the pulse of what's going on in your local communities. Right now, for example, it's a critical moment for the communities along the Big and Little Darby Creeks, including the city of Columbus and Franklin County. I'll give you a real quick high-level overview, but The Darby Creeks represent some of the most biologically diverse waterways in Ohio and even in a larger multi-state region. They're incredibly important to maintaining biodiversity, and we have good reason to believe that the Darby is at a tipping point. With potentially just a small amount of additional development, the Darby could be forever transformed from an outstanding biological resource of national significance, and that is a thing, I didn't just make that term up, to just another Ohio stream. The Darby Accord is what has kind of kept the Darby in the state that it's in, and it is reaching kind of the limits of its constraints. So the question becomes, can and should the communities along the Darby keep moving the goalposts to allow more development in a way that potentially could harm the Darby, or should we be looking to balance development with the preservation of the Darby? And advocates like TNC and Nathan's colleagues at OEC are now working with the Darby Accord communities to do just that. And I want to put this last bit in. I know it might seem silly, but we heard a lot about challenges to public lands. And truly, we have seen some hostility toward public lands across the board. You heard about congressional hostility to public lands, but I hear it when I speak to members of the General Assembly. Someone actually said in Ohio, we have, a member of the General Assembly said, in Ohio, we have too many parks, which is wild considering we're 44th in the nation for public lands. But support your park district levies, tell your policymakers that you like green space and that it's why you live in your community. Those kinds of things are important for policymakers to hear, even at the local level. So those are just a few examples. But what do you do if you think there are opportunities to advocate? First, ask around, see if other organizations like TNC, like OEC are doing work, because it can be, they can give you strategies or even tools to advocate. And also just reach out to your local policymakers and tell them what you think is important. It is, I think, a lot of times not understood how much more important the words of a local constituent can be than someone like me who's paid to lobby. They really do care what their constituents think more than they care about someone like me. So I hope you'll continue to look for those opportunities and think about ways that you can impact policy. Last but certainly not least, now is a very dispiriting time to be working on environmental issues. And whether it's because of harmful policies, hurtful rhetoric, or just plain fear for our communities and our planet, it can be tough to stay focused on these issues. So I would just encourage everyone to stay positive and stay motivated and keep advocating for the things you care about in your own sphere of influence, as I like to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Ramiro Berardo. I'm a professor of environmental and natural resources policy at the School of Environment and Natural Resources. I think I know many of you. I've seen some of my students here today, so thanks for coming. And thanks to everybody for four great presentations. So what I'm going to do is very simple. I'm supposed to moderate the discussion. I'm just going to ask a few questions, one for each one of our presenters, and maybe you can address those questions in a minute or so. Some of them have beat me to it. I think they kind of talked about the things that I was going to ask about, so the answers might be short, which is great, and then we're going to move on to the Q&A, if that's okay. Okay, so I have four questions. I'm going to go in the order that the presentations went. So for Chris, this idea of preserving the institutional knowledge that water managers have, it's a really good one. And I guess the question is, how does that happen? And where do you think that institutional knowledge is going to be in about, let's say, a decade? And furthermore, can we do anything as citizens to support that preservation of that institutional knowledge? You want to address it now? That's fine.
I think one thing is you got to understand that this push for, I hope it's not too strong a term, but the eradication of institutional knowledge at the state level really started about 10 to 15 years ago. And it was part of a national playbook to weaken the implementation of environmental laws without changing the laws. Changing the laws would have been too visible. So, and I know in one state in particular that I had it wasn't here in Ohio, it was somewhere else. I won't name the state, but the administration was very open with their staff saying that we know we can't change environmental laws, but we're gonna change the way we implement them. And if we put in less knowledgeable people, it's not likely to cause pushback against decisions that are being made from the top down, a lot of which you just saw today in spades. So I hope it's not too late. That has happened a little bit here in Ohio, and I've personally been involved in trying to maybe work with some of the agencies, and there are opportunities to go out and give presentations that they attend, but it's not like engaging them at their level on a daily basis. And there has been little receptivity to things like this. I think one success that I can point to is that this issue with the forks in the road with the use designations in the standards that could have led us down a different very path. We made comments on a report the agency did on the large rivers about 2 years ago, and they actually inserted the write-up for that in the preamble, so I give them credit for doing that. At least that's documented on the record. But I think we got a long way to go to actually accept the fact that they do need to recover this old knowledge. So,
All right, thank you. Moving on to Trent. I would say you painted a very somber but realistic picture of where we are on the road to deregulation and the effects that this might have on the environment. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about your strategy as a lawyer and as a member of the organization to counteract this trend, and tell us about some specific actions that you're involved in these days to at least slow down these negative impacts of the regulation.
Yeah, well, at MBI, we are science first, science always, and that's really where it needs to start. Going back to the basics, as Chris was explaining, it took a long time just with the Clean Water Act to get it to where it needed to be. Unfortunately, it's becoming really, really quick to unravel it. And it's going to take a long time for us to build it back up. But it starts with the basics. It starts with the science. NBI, we've got folks right now in the field collecting data. That data is going to be put in front of the agencies. It's going to be put in the hands of local groups, local businesses, local governments to say, this is what we need. This is what's happening. Mary was 100% on it, that it starts at the local level. Chris brought up, City of Columbus, those local municipalities. They're the ones that do the work, care about the work. It has to start at that local level, and it has to start with the science that's behind it. Lawyers like us can only do so much. Not only is Nathan a happier guy, but he's also a smarter guy than me. But I at least know that I can lean on folks like the scientists in our office, like folks like Nathan, like organizations here, and starting at that smaller level, training communities and community groups like MBI also does to have folks that they don't wade and fish in executive orders. They wade and fish in small streams and backyards, in larger rivers. And it's being able to take that data and show that to the local governments, show that to the state government, and say that we need to protect this because of this, and this is why. And it has to start at that smaller local level.
All right, thank you, Trent. Nathan, NEPA update. I was teaching about that yesterday, and I wish I had your slides instead of mine. But one of the main criticisms of the current U.S. president about NEPA historically, since his first term, was that regulations, permitting process takes too long, right? Like environmental impact statements take too long, and so the agencies are always like getting in the way of economic development. I guess that's the main take. So what do you think about that? Is there some truth to that? When regular folks hear about these extended periods of time that it takes a SEI to go through, do they have a point? How do you respond to that main criticism of regulations as something that just slows us down unnecessarily, I guess?
Well, I think part of it goes to where did the values lie? So it's all relevant in that sense. I mean, NEPA was passed in basically the very beginning of 1970. It was signed, but Congress passed it in 1969. It has a very strong policy. It is often folks might think of it as the National Environmental Protection Act, but no, it's the National Environmental Policy Act. And reading the policy, the national policy that was enacted, that's still in full force, at least in statute, in the country here today, it's really remarkable. I would say in some ways maybe ahead of its time. I think we've regressed in a lot of respects, but that policy of ensuring a balance, a harmony of humanity's interaction with nature, almost getting to the point where it's almost saying, I will say it does say, how about, that we have a right to a clean environment, a healthy environment, and open spaces. So that's part of what is at stake here. And I think, conceiving it merely through the lens of, a corporate construction project or an extraction project on public lands, if it's only viewed as that kind of item, then, maybe thought of differently. But perhaps a different way of getting to the point is some of it just comes down to allowing the public to be involved. Do we value public participation? I mean, sure, it'd be a lot faster if we totally cut out or greatly reduced public comment periods. Part of it's just moving at the speed of rationality, I think. We need to bring data in, we need to review it. Public is involved, comments, the feds review that and proceed. So again, I think some of it is just that time is very valuable if you want to actually have a rational process. And I would also say that, some of it is on the agencies as well. If they do a great job right away and kind of make sure they're actually looking at all the issues and putting forward a good faith effort to consider the science, to respond and treat it fairly, then projects can move through a lot faster too. So I think that's part of the equation as well.
All right, thank you. And in fact, that happened during the Biden administration. The timing went actually down. So the agencies have been moving faster. So that's great. All right, thank you, Nathan. And finally, for Mary, Mary, I guess, presented a more, I don't know if optimistic is the right word, view of how we can meet this moment. And she put the emphasis on that action at the local scale. So can you say even a little bit more about that for our students in the room? I feel like sometimes we, at least the professors, we're a little bit too pessimistic, and the students are like, oh no, and pessimism can lead to cynicism, and that can lead to inaction. So I think it's good to put the emphasis on what we can continue to do. Right. So what would you say to the students in the room? What can they do today, the next week, in the next month, to feel like they have an impact and it's a positive one?
Yeah, I think, I mentioned that policymakers want to hear from their constituents, and they really value what their constituents say. But I would go a step further and say that some of the most effective advocacy that can happen is folks telling their stories, really sharing the impact of policy on their lives. It cannot be, I can't say enough how influential those stories can be. And I'll give you an example. In the early part of the current presidential administration, there were a lot of things that were happening. You guys all know about DOGE and huge shifts in policy at the federal level. And our teams that go to Washington, D.C. were talking to their members and saying, hey, we know that you support these agencies and that you want the work to continue in the way that it has been continuing. What can we do to help you? And they said, we need the stories. We aren't getting the stories. We aren't hearing the stories. We're hearing the facts. We're hearing the numbers. And those are important too, certainly. But the stories make that influential change more easy to communicate. It's easy to see those numbers and kind of detach mentally and emotionally from even the most devastating numbers. But it's a lot harder to look somebody in the eye and tell them, I don't care that your business is not able to go forward. I don't care that this grant that was keeping your farm afloat is going away. So those stories, communicating those at the local, at the state, at the federal level are really important.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. That's great. Thank you all. Now we open it to questions from the audience. Anybody? Yes. Let's go here.
This isn't directed at anyone exactly. Anyone can answer, but I was wondering how do we get in to talk to local officials? Because I've been I don't live in Fairfield or Franklin County. I live in Fairfield, but I go to the city of Columbus City Hall meetings sometimes. Is that somewhere where you could start? But can I even talk as a Fairfield person, or do I just need to go Fairfield, like my own county?
I think if you have a presence in that community, if you're being impacted by a community, even if you're not a resident, those stories do make a difference. Obviously, if you're working in a community, or if you're being impacted by things happening in a community, I think you have every right to speak in front of their policymakers.
And I would just add, don't be afraid to go to Fairfield County folks, those as well. I'm sure they are hearing a lot from folks that are developing and reaping money from the county. So they need to hear from you all. Just don't be afraid to knock on someone's door because they won't know what those stories are unless you tell them.
Good morning to students and continuing students. I haven't heard the word, I came a little late, but I haven't heard the word privatization, which is taking over our public works, water, assets, land, post office, et cetera, EPA. The younger people probably don't know about the revolving door, how people in the biz, corporate type people, will get into an agency, a federal agency, a big government agency, and infiltrate and find out loopholes and things like that, which is akin to spying to me. But anyways, thank you.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about it. That and agency capture, which I think was part of what the other part of what you're saying. And absolutely, I mean, those both are huge factors in administrative agency life and the unfolding of our democracy, for good or ill. And I would say on the privatization side, we've heard a lot of rhetoric from the administration about selling off public lands. And we're still waiting to see what some of these proposals will look like. But needless to say, it's a very troubling indication or signal from the administration. I mean, these lands, federal public lands, are owned by all of us. And I think, the prospect of losing that resource from the public domain is very troubling. On the topic of agency capture, wow, it's hard not to be cynical. I guess it's just being realistic. But, at a lot of the agencies, I won't name names, I guess, but I mean, in many respects, it can be essentially a venue for industry to determine how it's regulated, is one way of putting it. But it's I would say, irrespective of administrations, it's pervasive. Certainly worse under some than others. Right now, it's very keen, but I think it's just part of the system that ought to be addressed in some respect. It's very systemic.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, in terms of privatization, with especially a public utility like a water plant, water supply plant, or a water treatment plant, we've already had 3 or 4 decades of experience with that being a completely failed experiment because of the profit motive. And it does cost money to treat water and wastewater. And the profit motive leads to corner cutting and noncompliance. So my experience is it does not work.
Thank you. I have a question in the back.
Ramiro called us professors all pessimists. So I actually see a more mixed picture. So federal politics tends to go in cycles, right? So presumably some of these executive orders will be reversed someday. But at the state level, though, I think the picture is a lot more grim. I don't know if any of you are more optimist than I am, but I don't see the pendulum swinging the other way anytime in the foreseeable future, right? So, and it seems like, I mean, getting the evidence, getting the data, it's all good, but it seems like science itself is becoming kind of a matter of belief to a large portion of the constituents. So, I mean, given all of this, how do you see state environmental policy going in the near future? In what direction would that go?
I can try to be optimistic. I hear what you're saying. I mentioned redistricting. I think we all know kind of the impact that gerrymandering has had on Ohio, and I do think that there are certainly some, again, very political and very challenging issues that it is very hard to try to persuade a majority that may may not feel a lot of pressure from the minority party. However, as I said in my presentation, I think when I go into the office of a member of the General Assembly, even if it's one that I've never met, I never assume that they don't care about the issues that we're pushing for. There are many, many, and I'm gonna, just say the elephant in the room out loud. There are many Republican members that I think folks probably assume don't care about the environment, but many, many of them do. And they want, whether it's because they're hunters and they understand that if we get rid of all the wetlands, we won't have any ducks in Ohio, or whether it's because they own a farm and they understand that, flooding and these huge weather emergencies that we are having will have an impact on their livelihood before too long. I just say that to say, don't assume that we can't find common ground on these issues. And it really is nonpartisan. At the end of the day, a lot of what we're talking about. I know it's more of a challenge for things like deregulation, because that does get into some of those topics that are far more partisan. But yeah, look for that common ground, I guess, is what I would say.
I'll chime in on that one. Put on the positivity hat. It's not worn often, so I'll make use of it. One for perspective, keeping things positive. Well, okay, I'll start with the negative. So a couple of years ago, and many folks are aware, the Supreme Court issued the Sackett opinion, which defederalized, essentially stripped away protections for most wetlands in the country. Ohio's really great on isolated wetlands, at least in the sense that we have a set of state regulations that protect, to some degree, those wetlands. So we're really, in that respect, at this point in the game, so to speak, a leader environmentally on those isolated wetlands. So that's definitely a good thing. On the federal level, and just to try to prove Trent right that I am indeed happy, I am, in that a lot of our bedrock environmental statutes are so excellent and strong that even in the absence of regulation, or in the presence of regulations that are, let's say, suboptimal, there is a tremendous amount of accountability. I know it may not feel like it, but the potential for accountability in a lot of those statutes. And there's a lot of work to be done, and that's all the more reason why this career path and your studies are so important, because a lot of great tools are out there for us to use.
I'm afraid there's another disaster looming, and that is a year from November, voters statewide may be voting to repeal property taxes in Ohio. And I'm concerned that there will be innumerable local and state government impacts and a lot of indirect impacts on the kinds of programs we're talking about, and many others beyond that, funding public education in Ohio, for example. So I'm wondering if any of you dare tease out in your minds how that could play out if it were to pass. It's not easy to figure that out, because there will be all kinds of decisions that end up needing to be made at local and state levels. But still, it's, in my mind, a worry worth highlighting to the public, so that we perhaps can fend off and come up with alternatives to that ahead of time.
Ready?
David, the answer to your question is yes, start now, because you got a year. It needs to be brought up early and often that, yes, this is based on science. Yes, science is perhaps going away, but science is hard and science is expensive, but impacts are real. And making sure that folks, no matter what level of your environmental professional career you're in, you have a voice. And I don't want to give up on the state level. I don't want to give up on the federal level, but it is that local level, and like how much money that those property taxes go to protecting public lands, to protecting your water, to protecting the communities that surround you. I think when that goes away, the impacts are going to be absolutely real. The thing with the environment is that you can see the impacts rather quickly. It takes a long time to get those protections in, and there's a lot of folks that are sitting in this room that don't know the days that Chris was talking about in the early 70s, and there were water's on fire at the very least, and when that nice looking stream goes away in that local backyard, and it's because of money that was not spent, or water going into the households are dirtier because the amount of money was not spent because of this, you're going to quickly see the impacts. So that's why today you got to go and tell your stories. You got to explain why it costs so much. It really doesn't cost that much when you're talking about the benefits, and that's when I brought up that regulatory reform, all those initiatives that I know you all were a part of as well about regulatory reform. It was all this focus on the costs, but never on the benefits. So that's why everybody in this room needs to talk about the benefits of this and why we spend this money and why we take this time for regulation and the process, why we ask everybody to get on a soapbox and give their story in comment periods. It's because that is what's needed to create what we have today, and so that we don't go back to what it was.
To the pendulum swing that the professor raised. Even if we meet the next administration that has an opposite regulatory take, what types of environmental rollbacks or legal process changes are the most difficult to come back from? And to put a positive spin on this, for the law students in the room, where do we focus our attention in the future?
Okay.
So the biggest issue is something I don't know whether we're going to be able to get back, and it is the loss of expertise. Getting folks to come back to agencies and do this hard work is going to be the biggest thing, and that's why hopefully you all are here, and hopefully that's the push. We need to have more folks in science, more folks in advocacy, and more folks in law. I think that's where the worst part of this is, and you won't see the impacts until years after. Chris mentioned, and the brain drain in the state started 15 years ago, and we're sort of just kind of seeing what that means now. So I think that's where it is, and that's going to be hard to do with just a lawsuit or whatever. But I think the wins that we got over the past 50 years in the courts were based on polluters suing because of agency action on them. What we're going to find in the future is, as Nathan said, we have strong laws that Congress doesn't do anything, so they're not going to be repealing anything. So we still have those strong laws. It's getting advocates with clients that have those stories to tell to actually enforce those laws. You're going to have so much in the next few years, and who knows with the next administration, who knows what they're going to do, whether they want to go back to what we were or continue with what's going on now. We have the ability to enforce those laws. So that means utilizing citizen suit to say, hey, this regulation says this, you're not doing that, this person is being impacted, pushing those stories into court and doing it that way. We can't rely on enforcement actions to be from the government agencies to be what we rely on. It now has to be we push those cases, telling the stories through that mechanism, and hopefully defend those laws that have been doing pretty well over the past 50 plus years. Do you want to add more?
Yeah, I'll touch on that. I'll echo exactly what Trent was saying and Chris as well. It's part of it is just the human presence losing so many experts. Something I should have mentioned, I didn't. So while all the zone flooding is going on, another thing that's happening simultaneously is the budgets of so many of these agencies are being slashed. We're losing so much of the personnel base, and so it's sort of a very strange situation. More is being put on the agencies, more is being expected of them, less is being given to them. These agencies, for example, U.S. Forest Service is, massively underfunded to begin with. And that's something we don't necessarily appreciate. And, as a public lands litigator at times, I didn't necessarily appreciate, but it's just part of the context. And I think, fostering a culture where we value public service, where we value expertise, where we appreciate that this is about communities having power. There's so much power, political force in this world, so little of it with the people. And I think appreciating, well, hey, we do have power. It's about our communities, about protecting what we care about. I think more of the emphasis on that is going to go a long way. And I think in terms of, advice for young attorneys or students, I would say, one of the great things, this may not speak to everyone, but for folks who have personalities that are just really like to critical thinking is such an amazing thing and asset, and just really, valuing that and developing it and realizing, hey, I have a career path where I can use that sense of criticality as a source of livelihood, but it's needed more now than ever. And the other thing I would say is, get ahead for regulatory work. I don't know, what the course offerings are. Not that you have to dive into everything, but just to get a sense of how that works. And certainly if there are courses, I'm sure there are, that touch on the Administrative Procedure Act. That's knowing that backbone of administrative law is really important.
Yeah, regarding the oft-used pendulum swing metaphor, that in terms of the Clean Water Act, probably the Clean Air Act and the other major environmental legislations, from the late 60s, early 70s, the pendulum was way over here. It is now swung to way over here. And the problem is, I think the current effort is to stop the pendulum where it is right now, where it won't swing back. So to me, that's the issue. I think that's the goal. We're a ways from that happening, but that is the end game, and for it to last for a very long, long time. And who knows, we may all forget about it by then.
Thank you. All right. Well, on that pessimistic note, we've had a lot of good discussion, a lot of positive, a lot of negative, very evenly balanced, which is a goal of ours here at the EPN. So I want to take a quick moment to thank all of our speakers, Chris, Trent, Nathan, and Mary. Let's give them a round of applause. And of course, Ramiro Berardo as well. So as a token of our appreciation, as per tradition with the Environmental Professionals Network, we have certificates for each one of you. So Ramiro, if you wouldn't mind helping me pass these out. Thank you. And one for you too, Bella. You did a great job earlier. All right. Everybody, you can return to your table. Thank you. So just some quick remarks before we wrap up our breakfast and continue on to the conference, if you'll be joining there. I am really glad to see that we have so many students in the audience today. If you're a student, can you please raise your hand? Wow. Let's give them a round of applause. Waking up early for breakfast and networking is not easy when you're a student. It's not easy when you're a professional as well. I can attest to that. But thank you for being here. We're so glad that this program was of interest to you, and we hope that it was inspiring as you continue on your career trajectories. As Chris mentioned, the preservation of institutional knowledge is very important. I think he was talking about all of you as being the recipients of that institutional knowledge in the future. Now, I want to take a quick moment to talk about someone very special to the Environmental Professionals Network. Will Joe Campbell, who's in the back of the room, please stand up and wave? He didn't know this was coming. For nearly 8 years, from 2017 until 2025, Joe served as the director of the Environmental Professionals Network. And in that time, with the help of too many colleagues and partners to count, he led the delivery of 83 different breakfast and evening EPN programs, or gigs, as he likes to call them. Joe's leadership brought together nearly 12,000 attendees on topics ranging from soil health to climate action, and my favorite program title, Oh Christmas Tree, how sustainable are thy branches? He's the king of dad jokes, and he is now a dad. Recently, Joe's been reorganizing his office, and in that process, he's been offloading years' worth of papers into my office, which I've very greatly appreciated. We looked through most of these papers, Hallie and me, and we pulled out some of the original inspiration, essentially the words that Joe wrote himself his first days on the job about what he dreamed the EPN could be one day. So instead of leaving those words intact, we cut them up, and we created a collage of them on a GIF that you can probably see on the screen right here, which we're very happy to give to Joe right now. So Joe, if you wouldn't mind coming up to the front, I just want to hand this to you. And thank you for being a great mentor, a great leader. And an excellent director of the EPN. And if David Hanselman and Kali want to come up for a picture later on, let's do that.
Just real fast. I know we're short on time. Thank you very much, Harrison. This was really nice to see. I want to just call out one thing that I heard Nathan say, which was about accountability, potential for accountability. And Mary, something you said about the potential within different personalities. People can hold different positions, but their stories matter. And I think, David, you were an incredible visionary to see the potential in the EPN, what it could be. And I'm just so honored to have been a microphone baton passer from one leader to another. So thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
All right. Now, I do want to give a quick promotion for the next EPN program while you're all here. Very soon, on October 14th, we're going to return to our home field, the Ohio Farm Bureau 4-H Center across campus, for a program about sustainable finance. We hope that you'll join us over there early in the morning for another breakfast to talk about personal strategies, business level strategies to incorporate ESG into your own portfolio. That's going to be a great program. One more quick announcement is for a competition for all the students in the room, everybody who raised their hand. You have the potential to earn $60,000 and a trip to Paris, France, if you can have a great sustainability idea that you pitch to Ohio State Energy Partners. So there are flyers at the registration table. We hope that you'll put in a project. Now, another quick note about connecting with the EPN. Many of you are here as attendees. Maybe it's your first time, maybe it's your 20th time. Regardless, we would love for you to sign up and create an account on the EPN website. This is the single best way to stay updated about EPN programs. So you can follow the QR code there or at your table for more information about creating an account. Now, you can take a look at all the different members that have signed up with an EPN profile over the past couple of months. So we're really happy to have a directory of environmental professionals from across different sectors, from across different counties in Ohio. This is the single best way to, in our opinion, learn more about how you can network with environmental professionals from across the state for the purposes of finding someone to bring in your classroom, for the purpose of creating a partner for a project, doing really anything. We think that this directory is the best way to stay updated. Now, before I turn it over to Chris Tavener from the OEC, a couple of quick notes about the Environmental Law Conference that is across 12th Avenue. Oh, and the screen is telling me I forgot to mention that we have a LinkedIn now, finally. So follow that LinkedIn too for more updates. So the law conference will continue very shortly at the Moritz College of Law building across 12th Avenue. Chris will come up in a moment.